Yes, indeed.
Thank you, Paul.
Uh, so let me give you one for the road.
Have we really, Amaz, is this a test or have we started?
We are going to finish at 4 after 8, so we have started now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
right.
we're good. We're good. Yeah.
Okay.
Welcome, everyone. I am Almas Negash, and I'm so delighted that you can join us. People are still coming, but I wanted to share that we have to hear Pope every year. He comes in person and really starts the African Diaspora Investment Symposium for the last 5 years. The 6th year is taken virtually, and Paul was available to do this for us virtually. I want to thank Paul and my wonderful friend Chike for making this possible. So, Paul, it's yours for a while, and then I'll let you go at 4 minutes after 8.
Okay, so I can hit it now, right?
Yes, you can. Yes, please.
Thank you.
And we will all mute.
Chike, can you hear me though? How can I come and drink a rum? Till I wanna go. I did a dream, black tarantula. Till I come and wanna go. Hey, say hey, oh. Till I come and wanna go home. Hey, say it, say it, say it. Till I come. How can I come and drink rum? Till I come and wanna go. I can't till I come and wanna go. Till I come and wanna go home. Till I come and go home. A beautiful bunch of rabbits.
Okay.
I come and wanna go home. I did that tarantula. Till I come and wanna go home. Hey. Daylight come.
So, I'm understanding that so what are you
Calm down now. Oh Lord, calm down now. Send your mighty power. Calm down now. Oh Lord, calm down now. Send your mighty power. Calm down now. Oh Lord, calm down now. Na, 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 na. Daylight coming, we wanna go home. Daylight coming, we wanna go home. Everybody dance, everybody dance, everybody dance. Daylight coming, we wanna go home. Everybody dance, everybody dance. Move, everybody shake. Come on now.
Good morning, Daddy.
Do, 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 yeah, yeah. Ooh, oh, 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 da, 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 da. Daylight coming, we wanna go home. Oh, oh, oh. Eh, 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 eh. Daylight coming, we wanna go home. Daylight coming, we wanna go home. Oh, oh, oh. Daylight coming. Oh yes, oh yeah. Da-da, Daylight coming, we wanna go home. Ooh, daylight coming, we wanna go home. Daylight, 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 daylight coming, we wanna go home. Yeah, 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 yeah. Daylight coming, we wanna go home. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Pope. Thank you so much. Thank you for making this possible. Thank you, Chike. Have a wonderful day. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. My name is Almaz Negash. I am the founder and executive director of the African Diaspora Network. On behalf of all of us, the board of African Diaspora Network, the Executive Leadership Council, our staff, our champions, and especially the funders who made this possible, I welcome you. Every year, for those of you who are new to us, this is our 6th year of the African Diaspora Investment Symposium. Every year, we've been able to host people from all over the world. We are a network of Africans and Friends of Africa. We've been bringing you to Silicon Valley and we're welcoming you. We've been having a wonderful time for 2.5 days. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we can't get together in person, but I'm very grateful for the technology that allows us to be together, albeit virtually. We are also aware, I'm personally very touched by what's happening around the world, just like all of you. We've lost almost 150,000 people in the United States and around 650,000 people around the world. That includes my home continent, Africa. I think we have to be humble by this moment. I'm every day reminded how lucky I am to do what I do from my own safe home with my family. And I think there are so many people suffering everywhere. And I wanted to ask you, all of us, to really think about them every time we are complaining about whatever it is. We must really sit down and think about what about the other people. And I'm very grateful for that. And I'm also absolutely over the top this year. Everyone, all our funders, our members, our supporters came and said, what can we do to help? And I wanted to just share the funders for this year, because it isn't just who they are, it's also how we got to know them. So if you don't mind, if you could allow me to openly just say thank you to the United States African Development Foundation, Silicon Valley Community Foundation, the Hilton Conrad Foundation, especially this morning, is really funded by the Conrad Hilton Foundation. So thank you, Peter. Thank you, Sister Jane. Thank you, all of you. To our friends at the Department of State, thank you, Ashwood, Thomas, and everyone who has been a part of us. And for those of you who may not know, the African Diaspora Investment Symposium started with seed funding from the State Department. So I'm very grateful for them for continuing to support us. Our own county, the county of Santa Clara County, and then a very generous gift from an African diaspora who wants to stay anonymous. And we've never received that generous gift from anyone in the diaspora. And I'm very grateful for that person. You know who you are. The Hughes Stewart Center Charitable Trust, special thanks to Agnieszka and Art. I love you all, and Tiba Foundation and new founder. And then, of course, our chairman, Chum Dejin. He's not just only supportive fund-wise, but also an amazing leader. Joshua, Josh, wherever you are, thank you. And DA, also our board members, and merely a great friend of mine, and so is Tawalde. This list is going to keep going and going and growing. This is for this session, and it will go on, and I'm very grateful we have others in the pipeline. But this morning is about the first in the series of the symposium, the African Diaspora Investment Symposium. We'll have 7 series instead of doing it in 2 days. Zoom, our board was brilliant enough to say, let's just do it in 7 sessions. So over the next 7 months, we will engage you in different aspects. And we are focusing this year on education, healthcare, connectivity, and also access to finance. And this one, we are going to start with funding, because our community, as you know, whether we are in Africa or wherever we are, access to capital for Africans and African Americans is not very easy. And in fact, for many women and minority also is not easy. So this morning is a wonderful session where we will begin to hear about what is possible. So before I let you, I give it to Peter from Conrad Hilton Foundation, who's going to moderate this, the fireside chat. I just want to make sure that all of us need to mute, and also, it's, if possible, put the video off so that our friends and partners from Africa and other places in the world can actually have access to the forum. I also would like to make sure. I wanted to make sure that this is not the end, it's a beginning, but I also would encourage you, in case I don't see you or you drop out early on, and which is possible, I would like to encourage you to continue this discussion on our online platform. We will also send you a summary of the session plus the video. Please join our network. Please support this organization, because at the end of the day, it's us who want this, and we can only survive through your support. And we want to make sure that this is a sustainable organization. Again, thank you, everyone. And Peter, it's your floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Almaz. And good morning, everyone, or good evening, depending on where you are. Wonderful to see all your faces. Many of you I know, and many more I look forward to meeting. Almaz, a great musical opening. I can see a lot of you were enjoying it, and I hope you take that spirit into this discussion. Thanks to Almaz and to ADIS for bringing this diverse group together on this important topic. My wife Marie is from Rwanda, and I can tell you that the Rwandan diaspora has been greatly anticipating this series and today's discussion, and I'm sure that's true across the whole of the African diaspora. The topic of today's fireside chat is the response in Africa and in the USA to COVID, as well as ideas about the post-pandemic times. We have 2 great speakers who have roots in philanthropy, civil society, the private sector, and government. I won't go through their entire bios because that would be long and exhausting for us, but I can tell you Latanya Mapfret is the president of the Global Fund for Women, an awesome organization working with women's and girls groups all over the world. And prior to that, she worked with Planned Parenthood, with USAID, and with UNICEF. So she brings a whole variety of perspectives to this conversation. Dr. James Mwangi of Kenya, you know as the CEO of Equity Group Holdings Limited, also the head of the Equity Group Foundation, a very important foundation doing excellent work. And he's very involved in Kenya's response to COVID and in African and global development issues more generally. We're honored to have the two of you as panelists and really looking forward to a lively discussion. So let's start with you, Latanya. What have we done well so far in COVID in Africa, and what are the greatest challenges?
Thank you, Peter. And just to remind folks to go on mute. It's been a real pleasure, Almaz, to receive this invitation. And I am an Africanist. I am an African, born and raised in Philadelphia here in the US, but so important to me, and much of my career has been spent on the continent working together with local communities. And so being here at the Global Fund for Women is a pinnacle and an opportunity to be able to fund directly women's groups and women's movements as they determine what their own needs are and what the strategies and movements are for them. I am, like most of us, very humbled by the moment we're in for public health, but also very optimistic about where we are around social movements. We've been providing at Global Fund for Women crisis funding around COVID-19 since the outset of the pandemic. And we've really been focused not just on the response, but thinking about recovery and resilience afterwards, because we know the answer to most of the questions, particularly during emergency, lies in the communities, and it lies with, the first responders who also come from within those communities. And so we've been seeing just the most wonderful things. At its core, Global Fund for Women already offers flexible funding to women's groups. And so what we did was put out a call and said, listen, under these circumstances, what can we do for you? How can you shift your funding so you can address the needs, especially the most pressing needs of your community? And what we saw was this immediate response from women's groups, which is not abnormal. I mean, this is what we expect from women's organizations, but we saw people who were doing maybe advocacy starting to shift and do things like running helplines for victims of domestic violence during shelter-in-place orders. We saw work to maintain reproductive health services and abortion access while women had to stay at home. We saw this doubling down on racial justice and LGBTQI issues in response to increased police brutality. And, and more importantly, are the little things like creating information for community members in their language, and things like making masks where you had to respond quickly and protect your community and your families. And so what we've been seeing, I feel like, is this, yes, it's a response, but it's also really, I think the world is saying no more. We're not going to live in a world with these deep inequalities that in one place it affects someone very different than it did before. And, and use this as a portal to change the way we do things in development, the way we do things in humanitarian assistance, and in other ways, so that I feel like that this is, of course, a crisis, but it's also an opportunity. Thank you.
Super. So lots of good action to support and possibilities in the future. James, how about your perspective from Kenya? What's going well? What are the challenges? You're muted, James.
Thank you very much. And it's really a privilege for me to have the opportunity to interact with the African diaspora. I think quite a lot is going well, despite the challenges. Of course, most of the African countries have triggered the strong preventive healthcare systems that have developed over time. And we have seen countries like Uganda and Rwanda, which traditionally has had to deal with diseases like Ebola, DRC too, really take strong moves out of that. We've also seen a very strong campaign culture, which traditionally has driven vaccination in the continent being triggered and the communities becoming much aware. And that has really worked very well. However, the greatest response have come from very responsible reaction from government, looking at realigning their budgets so as they prioritize health. And we have seen significant preparedness. If I talk specifically of Kenya, where I'm very, very familiar, we find out of the 47 counties in the country, institutions of learning have been converted into isolation centers. Each county has developed a 300-bed capacity for those who need medical care. So government reaction and response has been very, very central. But there are also foundations. If I then come home to the Equity Group Foundation has then challenged the corporate that it's its sponsor with reverse psychology. That the purpose of the Equity Group is to transform lives and livelihoods. And the foundation challenged the bank and said, this time, I think you need to protect lives, not to protect livelihoods. And essentially, I've seen the bank reverse its thinking. The first thing it has done is really to roll out a massive campaign towards its customer base and staff, and use its 10,000 staff to do literacy training on health to the entire customer base of 14 million customers, so that it brings awareness at a relationship level. The second thing is, of course, has been to really protect livelihoods by extending repayment periods for all the borrowers who need support. And we have given our customers up to 3 years repayment breaks of both principal and interest, so that we can ensure their enterprises are able to survive the wrong period, and to also to adjust and adapt to the new environment. And lastly is the foundation itself, looking and asking what it could do, and using its capability as a platform, raising $14 million and choosing to protect medical staff, particularly in Kenya. And that basically has involved using the capability of the bank to fund manufacturers to start manufacturing of PPEs in the country, and then buying those PPEs and ensuring all the referral hospitals have sufficient PPEs for all the frontline staff. May they be the doctors, the nurses, or the clinical officers. So that is the robust response that we are seeing in the continent.
Thank you, James. And I think a really important point you raise is how consistently the African response has outperformed both expectations and, frankly, the response in the US. And I'm sure most people on this call are thinking of the lessons that could be brought back to our own backyards of the quality of that response. Let me ask you a question along the lines that Latanya mentioned. She's hopeful about the future, the longer term, and hopeful about openings for changes. You've mentioned a number of things that the Equity Bank has done to respond to the crisis. Do you see longer term change for the private sector coming out of this?
I think COVID-19 is going to be a turning point for the world. I guess we'll see more of the world thinking about a purposeful world, a world where enterprises are purpose-driven or purpose-first. I believe human behavior to a great extent will be shaped by the lessons and the learnings. One of the biggest things is that COVID-19 has equated all of us, with money or without. The risk and the dangers are exactly the same. The rate of infections are the same. And the questions of essence of life have come to the fore for everybody. So I believe, and I've seen the UN agencies have started a campaign of ensuring that the world becomes more responsible. I think people have also become very, very aware about the divides. And I think the world will focus more on inclusion, whether it is social inclusion, whether it's digital inclusion, whether it's economic inclusion, to a greater extent, because we have been equalized in life by this invisible enemy. And consequently, we have realized we are as safe as fighting together If your neighbor is infected, if your colleague in the office is infected, the threat is as good as the infection. So essentially, I'm seeing as if the world is being called to consciousness. And I think that consciousness might trigger a transformation where sustainability of the world will address inequality as the biggest risk. We see, for instance, minorities in the developed world are more prone to exposure of this violence. When you come to developing countries, we see people living in informal settlements don't have even the basics, like the ability to social distance within their living environment in the entire neighborhood. They don't have really sufficient water for even the basic hygiene like washing hands. The question is, why would the world have so much, enough for everybody to live a decent life, yet we have almost a very significant portion? So I think consciousness will be awoken by this crisis.
Thanks, James. And Latanya, thinking about that, now you talked about a promising future, but I assume it's not a straight line, and there are bumps in the road. At the Hilton Foundation, we believe strongly in multi-stakeholder partnerships that include civil society, philanthropy, the private sector, and government. But how will the movements that you fund, which are sometimes need to be in advocacy and confrontational relationships with power, work with the private sector, work with government, so that this window can become a long haul opportunity?
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, and I guess I love that phrase, James, reverse psychology. I guess we can talk about that with government as well. There are certain things that government has to focus on, especially in a pandemic, and communities balance that. But I, in Global Fund for Women, truly believe that supporting movements as they emerge is how we get to lasting sustainable. So when to issues of how do you work with government, how do you align with what's happening, we're asking also government to do the same, right? It's each one having its role. So civil society and social movements have been, you know, it's not like it's just starting, but have been vehicles for change for many years. I come from, of course, a society where civil rights and again now racial justice after George Floyd is having to come again and again. So our expectations, you can pass laws, but to get to the culture, to get to the actual action that makes change happen, it has to come from the community, and the government has to support that change, has to not see it as adversarial, but to see it as a moment to be able to see the change that we all want and need in the world. Because it's not COVID that made these inequities happen, right? It's a world that's unequal. And that's why it's been applied unequally around the world. And I love that James talks about the response in the global South and the lower numbers than what you're seeing in the global North and how much that we've had. I mean, there has been so many examples before COVID of where, especially on the continent, like Ebola is a great example, a more recent example of where they've had to deal with this. And so the natural tendency would be just for governments in the North to follow some of the principles that were learned during Ebola. But you didn't necessarily see that happening. And that speaks to our unequal world that we live in. And so we have to tackle that. We've also seen, even in the African region, but in other regions, we've witnessed where this COVID stay-in places have been an excuse for governments to increase their militarization, the xenophobia, the authoritarianism and racism, as we saw in the United States. And so this is really concerning for us at Global Fund for Women, that this notion of controlling populations under the guise of social distancing and other coronavirus emergency measures. And this is where we feel like communities really have to be supported, have to stand up, have to fight back, because those realities can't help with the threat of the virus, nor will they help with all of the other social movements that have been in place and need to encourage and go forward as we are in this moment. So we know domestic violence has been a problem. We know racial justice continues to be a problem, and there are already movements that have been built and need to be supported. And I feel like government has to align with that. And so while, you know, this reverse psychology that for the private sector that James speak of, I hope it also exists in governments where they can see social movements as partners and not as adversaries in this moment and support them. And we in the funding world also have to get behind that and look for organizations that need support during COVID so that we can be there to encourage sustainable social movements.
Thanks, Latanya. James, thoughts as you're listening to Latanya's description?
I think Njenya has just put it plainly that governments must appreciate the role that partnerships can bring forward. I've seen, for instance, in Kenya, what the government, you know, its wisdom decided was to get the private sector to head the Kenya National COVID Response Fund, which I was honored to be made the chair of the Health Fund. And as among us is the 7 CEOs who control the largest multinational organization in the Kenya. So the way we compete for customers is the way we are competing to save our customers, essentially. And I've seen the resources, like what we said, Equity bringing in $14 million, then giving reprieve to all its customers to a cost of about $2 million every month in terms of waiver on charges. Just as and when each of these corporates play this role, the aggregating impact of all these corporates to the COVID war is very, very significant. So I think time has come for us to learn that working together, we are better off than really being or finding a common purpose that can make us work together. Mobilize the resources of both the development institutions, the civil society, the NGOs, the private sector, and government, and bring the knowledge and the capabilities that is spread along all these arms that brings different experiences and exposures to the table. I realized, for instance, this situation require leadership that has dealt with uncertain times. And most of the private sector, we're always dealing with uncertain times. So we are more responsive and more agile in our handling of the situation that may be bureaucracy. And that may be what the government may have all the resources, but we can bring the insights of dealing with uncertain times.
Thanks, James. It seems to me, listening to the two of you and to many other similar conversations that we hear going on today, that the situation has brought us together in the sense that we are speaking in terms of similar goals, that the future should be better than the past was, that we have similar hopes that this is not just a disaster, but moves us forward. And we have a similar sense of urgency. I think we have divergent concerns sometimes about what might go wrong or what needs to be prioritized. And I think that puts a burden on those who lead and coordinate these large partnerships to bring people together, to listen well. You know, and I think the two of you will be really important in that. I wanted to maybe shift a tiny bit. You'll see we're up to almost 170 members of the diaspora who are on this call. And both of you are involved with the diaspora. What do you think the role of the diaspora in a really proactive response to COVID and to the times after should be? What's your message for the people on this call? Latanya, you want to start off on that?
Yeah, sure. And because mine is going to be fairly simple and no surprise coming from the Global Fund for Women, but we have to listen to women. Listen, under this pandemic, we already know that 70% of healthcare workers are women. We already know the burden, the caregiving burden that women have in the homes. and the pay, unequal pay issues that women have. We've seen maternal mortality affected during this pandemic. We've seen intimate partner violence go during this pandemic. You know, girls' education is at risk, something that we've been working very well on the continent toward, but because of remote learning and access to things like computers, laptops, and internet, we're starting to see a reversal here. So there's so much that's happening with women and girls that has been positive that we risk now reverting and going backwards. And my plea is, as we come to the end of this short chat, that we continue to prioritize women, to protect women, and to listen to women as we get through this. Because if we're talking about not just responding to this, but also ensuring the resilience of our communities, it means that we have to stand up and ensure the equality and equity that's necessary to build that kind of resilience in our communities. And so for me, it is very, very important that we understand and see the inequities that are happening, that we recognize that they're based on a long historical approach, and this is worldwide towards women, and that we now use this as an opportunity as we see them as our our frontline workers, to be able to protect them, to pay them equally in what they're worth, and to ensure that we hear from these feminist movements that are standing up and trying to ensure a more fair world, that we look at that seriously and think about how we can continue to support them.
So, Latanya, one way that people could do that, of course, is contributing to an organization like the Global Fund for Women. What are other practical things that you would suggest to people to do?
Yeah, and you know, so I love this idea around bringing together different sectors. And so I know we come from all over the globe, and we're also experiencing the diaspora in different ways. And so I think funding and supporting women, whether that's the Global Fund for Women or other amazing organizations that exist, we also, I think, have to be a part of the solutions that we're coming up with. And those solutions don't come up in the capitals of our countries, right? These solutions actually come together in the communities. And so I, am avid that when we have opportunities to come together as government, private sector, civil society, that we have youth at the table, that we have feminist groups at the table, that we have marginalized communities, whether that's racial, religious, gender, LGBTQI, but that they're sitting at the table so we know what the most vulnerable of our communities actually need. And so when we talk about coming up with solutions, that we do that together, because they look different everywhere, right? I mean, different needs. But one thing we can assure is that these come from the communities, and only listening to the communities are going to get us these sustainable approaches and solutions that we need.
Thanks, Latanya. James, what is your thinking and your advice to the diaspora?
I think sitting in the continent, the first thing is that is to appeal to the diaspora, particularly at a time like this of a health pandemic, to be in the front line, maybe carrying the messages of the continent out there. I think the narrative of Africa needs to be retold and reshaped, and that would be a very significant position that the diaspora can play, because it is positioned and seated where that narrative needs to be changed. The second one is, of course, at a time like this, while social safety nets are all triggered by the governments and all of us in the continent, I think are helping hard at the household level. If diaspora can remember their families, their villages, a neighbor family with their villages, and support at a time like this, I will go a long, long way to ease the human suffering and the pain, or the human pain that a lot of families are going through. But let me add my voice there of appreciation, because everybody expected diaspora flows will be constrained, but we have seen a upsurge and an increase in the flows into the continent from the diaspora. The second one is that in the past, when we lost this diaspora, it was a brain drain. let's look also at the opportune time when we can turn this diaspora drain into a brain gain. And the brain gain here can come in many forms. We have skills and competences that we have learned, whether it's time to bring them back into the continent in forms of new technologies, new innovations, the issue of capital and investment opportunities in the continent, mainstreaming the continent, leapfrogging the continent investment with the knowledge acquired, the networks that has been built, and more importantly, the lessons learned, particularly if we talked about the health, the advanced health infrastructure, the advanced science and medicine, things like telemedicine. Africa would benefit a lot if we can do partnerships with the diaspora. Africa do the partnership with the diaspora. So that is a huge opportunity for the diaspora that it could really help transform the continent and fast track the speed of change. And lastly is the issue of looking at the opportunities in the continent. I think that we would really require a look, an imagining of the state of the continent. When most of the people left the continent, the diaspora left the continent, it was because of civil war, it was because of dictatorships. The continent has moved. Has it created a better environment for the diaspora than where they are? Has the continent changed enough to attract them back? That question, I would like to throw it out there. I may not have the answer. It must be in their lenses. But I think it's something to put at the back of the mind for consideration, because it could be the cause of the tipping point for the continent, because you are so properly socialized in the developed world, and you could be the best agents and catalysts of change in the continent.
So thank you, James. And I think that's a great double menu of options from Latanya and from James. And I would personally just give a shout to everyone on this call, because I'm sure that you have all done a number of the things that both Latanya and James were suggesting. I'm confident that you've been part of this very stable and growing remittances to Africa that have been really important now. We have about 6 minutes left in the conversation. So I'm asking the audience if they have questions. One here is, well, would like to hear more about the opportunities to learn from Africa that you mentioned. That's another way to engage the diaspora. Maybe, I guess, James, that's to you first. And I know that you wanted to talk a bit about trade and technology. If you had some ideas there that might be relevant.
I think the biggest opportunity we have in Africa is the opportunity to leapfrog on technology and innovations. Africa, we are free from legacy systems. So it is from a start. Africa has a very young population at mean age of 18 years, meaning that they are born and brought up during the digital era. So they are really digitally savvy. And we can use the skills and the competence that the diaspora have to lead and initiate the fourth revolution or the fourth industrialization and make Africa the epicenter of that transformation. And maybe, and I said earlier on, my bet is on the skills, the experience, the exposure, and the knowledge that the diaspora have to help trigger that. Most of the diaspora enjoy unparalleled trust because of the role they have played in sustaining their families, the knowledge and the skills they have acquired. So with that trust and with the knowledge, then the following would be very huge, and they could really build massive following. And that is really, particularly from young people, they can inspire. And that following may show the way. They may need to be the ones to be the torch bearers. The second one is helping us to transform our agriculture and our practices and our cultural practices. And the biggest agent of transforming culture might be sons and daughters of this continent who are differently exposed, to tell us what is right with our culture and what we may need to change for us to make the next move. I'm looking at the issues that we're using to manage COVID. We are using simple hygiene practices, washing hands and all that, and that should really be a basic in the context. Those are some of the issues that I believe they could help us leapfrog. And lastly is the massive networks they have built over the years they have been out there. Africa needs to be globally interconnected. And that may be the links that might be better than the government bilateral links that we have always relied on. Human to human relationship, culture to culture interconnectedness. That might be what is the answer that we have been all waiting for to see Africa's civilization transform and hopefully take the lead.
Thanks, James. And of course, when I asked for questions, I unleashed the floodgates. There are questions we won't have time for today, but let me tell you what the topics are. And perhaps Almaz and her team can find a way for you to answer them. There are questions on trade, investment, faith-based organizations, artificial intelligence, changing mindsets, and and specific questions on Ghana and on Kenya. Let me ask Almaz to get those questions to you. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I'd like to give you each.
I just want to quickly comment, because I think, James' call to the diaspora for further support and investment is an excellent call. I just want to lift up that I hope that we do that as a member of the diaspora from heartfelt, that we do that with unity as well as innovation, and that we do that as well with a face towards not just upholding some of the structures that come from the West and the typical capitalist and patriarchal structures that now make up the way that we do quote unquote business and investment. But when we think about innovation, think about it much more broadly and think about the concepts of which from an African culture, we can do that well and even better than we have been, so that marginalized members of our community can enjoy the wealth. And that's a bigger question than sort of investment, but so that we all can enjoy this equally. And I just wanted to lift that up and thank him for his comments as well.
Fantastic. And Latanya, why don't I ask you to give up to a minute of kind of final reflections for the group, and then James after you.
Oh, thank you. Yes. And I think a lot of things have been said, and I am, again, just very thankful for the opportunity to be on this call. And what I really hope that it moves us toward is this opportunity for the diaspora to be part of the solutions. And I know this is what Almaz and the organization are really trying to move forward, especially in a world where sometimes our solutions are not always looked at as the best solutions. And oftentimes we tend to look to other parts of the world, particularly the global north, for solutions that I hope that we're finding more and more as we see ourselves get through COVID, that we do have the answers and that we are able to respond and to ensure that we protect our people, and in particular that more than 50% of the society, that the women, that our mothers, our sisters, our daughters are part of that solution, and that we take special effort to ensure that they're able to have the tools they need to help communities, as they've always done throughout history, and that we don't sideline that in exception for other things that we see happening in the world. So I again thank and congratulate Almaz for doing this and having this opportunity to talk about these issues. Thank you, Peter.
Fantastic, Latanya, thank you. And James, take us away.
Peter, let me associate myself with Latanya, and particularly that it's not cut and paste. Is selecting that what will work for the African continent, and discarding that which has not worked and that is not suitable and desirable to have on the continent. The second aspect is try to respond on what the many questions you have asked. I think I want to highlight that really what Africa needs at the moment is things like big data, artificial intelligence, machine learning, so that we can enhance the quality of our decisions as much as we can and remove human biases among the decisions so that we can enhance the outcome. On the issue of trade, The timing couldn't have been better when the African continent have signed the African Continent Free Trade Area. And I've seen increasingly 42% of all the trade in the East African region is cross-border regional trade. So it is working, and the market is becoming bigger and bigger. And lastly, is we owe ourselves as the African diaspora and the African race a duty of making the continent better for our children. We shouldn't allow the narrative of the future of Africa to be a continuation of the past. Our legacy must be that of changing and making the future of Africa better. And if ours is purely to seed, create the foundation, or create the platform, so be it. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, James. And a very, very rich conversation. I hope it goes on, because I think your two perspectives are very important to one another. You share a lot and you complement the perspectives. And I think this is the sort of discussion and ultimately partnership that we need. So I will hand back at this point to
Thank you.
With the suggestion that you take a look at all the questions in the chat.
Oh, we will. Well, thank you, Peter. Really, thank you for this very inspiring and thoughtful conversation. James, we're so happy to have you from Kenya. Your insight matters. You kept talking, Latanya and James and Peter, about the diaspora. Let me just say about the diaspora, we remit 3 times more than what Africa gets from aid or even foreign direct investment. And I'm always in awe of the generosity of our diaspora. The question I keep asking is, what are we going to do to scale the remittances so that we could do what James and Latanya are asking us to do? What are we going to do today? And I'm very grateful that we have this platform. We will continue this discussion. We will continue to push this thing that remittances is not enough to sending to your parents and to your cousins. How about a portion of it to be reinvested in the community so that we can create a sustainable community, the vision that we have for the continent and the communities where we live. So I'm very grateful for your conversation, and we will record this. It will be available. So thank you for your time. And while I'm transitioning to the other session, which will be coming soon, I will ask everyone to take poll. There are 3 simple questions. Please give us your biggest thing. I'll stop it at 75%. Just answer these questions, otherwise I'm not gonna go, and it probably doesn't go itself either. So they're 3 simple questions for which we need your input. Thank you. Okay. Share results. Okay. So we have on the first one is grants at 48.94%. Second one is social and economic equity at 62.94%. And I do not see the third one, but I will now, is actually yes. 73%. Thank you, everyone. We will share this with the report. But right now, I'm very happy to introduce Sid, my favorite guy. He has been a part of the ADN network for a very long time. Sid is an amazing moderator, but a fantastic individual who I can reach out to and get the connections and the insight that I need. So Sid, where are you? And he will be accompanied by Viola, Hafiza, and Andile. And I believe they're all here. So the stage is yours. And everyone, please stay with us so that you can really have a full context of what Peter, Latanya, and James were talking about. So stay with us for a while. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Almaz. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. I'm really honored to be able to moderate
There
this
is an
conversation.
echo.
Is that from my end?
Maybe it's from other people. So I'm going to make sure that everyone is muted, please.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Okay, now it's good.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for, I still hear the echo.
Yeah, I still hear the echo.
Let me try it without the headphones. Can you hear me okay? How does that sound? Is that echo still there?
Much better.
Okay, let's get rid of these. Well, thank you, Almaz, and I'm really delighted to be moderating this this session with Andile Nkaba, Viola Llewellyn, and Afiza Rashid.
Sid, you still have the echo.
I'm not sure where it's coming from. Just hold a sec. I'm just testing without my volume on. Can you hear the echo still?
No, it's completely gone away.
Did you hear the echo then?
Not at all.
Huh. There's something to do with my computer. Just
okay.
If your headphones are still plugged in to your computer, that will create an echo.
Oh, okay. Okay, got it.
Okay, can you hear the echo now?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
So remove the wire from the headphone wire. That's what I heard.
Remove the headphone wire.
Okay, and put the volume down a little bit.
Volume down. Yeah, I'm on Zoom calls all day and this never happens, so I'm not sure
it's okay.
how to fix it.
Yeah.
Can you still hear the echo now?
No.
Okay, great. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Almaz. I'd like to very quickly introduce our panelists for this conversation. I think the previous conversation set a very good stage for this following conversations. It was very refreshing to hear that in Kenya, they had a private sector-led response to COVID. I was also very interested to hear what Latanya was saying about COVID not being a cause, but also pretty much being an accentuator. And I believe this is what's happening in the investment space. So we have three amazing panelists. Viola Llewellyn is the president and co-founder of Amber Solutions. They provide various financial solutions, including trade finance, which I'm very interested to talk about today. Andile Nkaba is a founding partner and chairman of Convergence Partners. They are private equity investors and invest right across the continent in infrastructure and all kinds of technology companies. And Hafiza Rashid is the senior advisor for communications and outreach at the King Badwan Foundation, United States. And they take US donor funds and invest it in entrepreneurs and nonprofits in Africa and Europe. I'll allow them a little time to introduce themselves and what their organization does and why they're interested in this topic. As you introduce yourself, at the end of your introduction, I'd also like to ask you to give us a balance sheet introduction, something that somebody would not know by looking at your LinkedIn profile or your online profile, something interesting and out of the ordinary. So maybe let's start with Viola. Introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's so good to be here. Almaz, I'm really grateful for all that you've done. And Sid, here we go. My name is Viola Llewellyn. I am the co-founder and president of Avamba Solutions, Inc. We are a trade tech solution for Africa with a specific focus on creating technologies that drive financial inclusion using the elements of trade and bundling that into digital packages for the banks to do more of what they should do, and for our partners across Africa to help support the expansion of wealth, growth, and development for small and medium enterprises, especially the informal sector. The problem here is that I have a very big mouth. I'm always talking. So my Facebook, my LinkedIn, and all of my social media, it's very easy to figure out some things. But the one thing that anybody who knows me knows is true is my love of Prince and my love of Batman. Don't get me started. That's all I can say. Batman is an icon for me. He is a model of leadership that I have accidentally found myself emulating between him and Captain Picard of the Starship Enterprise, and Prince. For now, I'm a Purple Widow. So maybe after this, we can all talk about my love of men who are not my husband.
Thank you, Viola. We are united in our love of Prince. Andile, could we get your introduction, please?
Thank you. Thank you, Sid. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Andile Nava is my name. I'm in Johannesburg, based in Johannesburg, but I shuttle between Johannesburg and the Bay Area. What we do is we are a private equity fund, only focusing in technology. We invest in submarine cable systems. We have invested in satellites. We invested in cloud data centers. We've invested in application companies. And the full stack of before we have exited, we have invested in mobile companies. And we also have interest in VC funds and which are based in Cape Town. So, but our assets are spread across East, West, and Southern Africa. And we have partners in some of our investments, such as Mitsui of Japan, Google, and many other companies. I mean, our philosophy is that of building a digital Africa. And we can see how important that is, in particular at this time. So my one thing that you don't know about me, I love pepper soup.
Was that pepper soup? Wonderful. That is definitely off the balance sheet. Thank you. And Hafiza, could we get your introduction?
Not just love it, not just love it. I know how to do it very well. But...
Wonderful.
My name is Hafiza Rashid. I'm Senior Advisor of Communications and Outreach at the King Goodwin Foundation, United States, which is based in New York City. What we do is we are an intermediary between an individual or a corporate foundation or family foundation that wants to make a tax-deductible donation to their favorite social entrepreneur project or nonprofit that's based either in Africa or in Europe. What I do is I'm located in several different places: my guest room, my bedroom, my living room. But I guess you all know that as Brooklyn. And something to know about me, I like to sew. So I made my own masks for my families. I don't sew well though. So this is the extent of my project.
That looks amazing though. Thank you so much. So, you know, one of the things that was mentioned in the previous conversation was about the role that COVID has played in the effect it's had And maybe we would like to start with you, Andile. What are you seeing as you look at your entrepreneurs and your investments? What kind of effect COVID has had?
Sure, thanks, Sid. I mean, just to give you one or two indicators, we run a connectivity business. What we have seen is, I mean, growth in the utilization of the internet in the continent. I mean, the numbers way beyond anything we have ever seen before. I mean, I almost sometimes randomly call my colleagues in Nairobi, Dar es Salaam, in Abuja, Port Harcourt, in Lusaka. I mean, almost people spend in all these platforms of conferencing, social media, probably 10, 12 hours a day, basically. And we have seen this huge increase in traffic, I mean, of the internet, in almost every aspect, every part of the internet, in the ocean, in the use of mobile, you know, traffic to cloud platforms, everywhere. But here's a challenge also, Sid, that we have also seen the fact that kids are not going to school, you know, a very glaring digital divide that has shown its ugly face at this point in time. Those who have access to the internet and those who don't. And therefore, you know, in our view, there is no better time than now that has actually demonstrated, you know, the importance of this infrastructure for social development broadly and economic growth in general.
Great. If you don't mind, if I'd ask a follow-up question, how close are we to closing that infrastructure gap?
It's, I mean, if I compare, I mean, there was a cliche that people would use in the 90s that there are more telephones in Manhattan than in the rest of the continent. Definitely, we have a lot of mobile devices today than before. You are able to phone most villages in the continent, but the issue is still the cost to communicate. The divide, yes, it exists digitally, but the underlying factors that contribute to that divide is still the cost to communicate. I mean, if you think about, you know, where you are, Sid, I mean, or I mean, I don't know if, I mean, Viola, if you say, how much do you buy data for compared to someone in Lusaka or in Burundi, for instance. So I think that is one big issue we still need to address, you know, the cost to communicate, the cost of data. I mean, because there are infrastructure, you know, at least available in cities, in peri-urban areas, but it is the affordability, I mean, that is still something that it requires two things. One, competition, and two, I mean, regulatory intervention. And also entrepreneurs to extend the network in order to reach villages, in order to reach areas that are not, you know, city centers of major, you know, capital cities of the African continent. So there is an effort, I must say, you know, if I use statistics and say, I mean, there are over today close to just over 300 million people in Africa on WhatsApp alone. I mean, you have, you know, close to 500 million people on the internet. I mean, but we really are pushing that by 2025, we must reach, I mean, at least over 700 million people. You know, there are people who still use the old mobile devices. I mean, we had a SIM card business. We've sold over 1 billion SIM cards, I mean, basically. But, I mean, those types of phones are 2G, 2.5G, 3G phones. So we need people to get into the internet via mobile devices, fixed connectivity, fixed wireless, fiber, and all other tools.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And for people in the diaspora who are out there, there's a great opportunity there to really contribute, because the growth of infrastructure is critical to us being able to move out of this phase. Hafiza, I know you work with donors that invest in entrepreneurs and companies in Africa. What have you seen in terms of what entrepreneurs are facing that are on the continent because of COVID?
Social entrepreneurs have really had to pivot in terms of what they currently do, their day-to-day business, in response to how to mitigate the harm that COVID does to communities in which they work. I'm thinking specifically of, there's a Kenyan-based organization that provides school children with lunches. They provide all the meals for school children. They contract with local farmers to provide fresh produce. They have a mobile tap system, so they're using technology. All these different things make up the ecosystem of how this social entrepreneur hybrid model interacts with their community and the children. Now, schools in Kenya are not open. So what does it mean for entire communities, not only the children, but their families, to not have a reliable source upon which they can kind of ground their day around the school schedule? So we have seen social entrepreneurs really step up and press with reaching out to the foundation world, where investors are a point where you can accelerate growth in a company, in an organization, and foundation dollars may be a way to sustain it through transitions like what the pandemic has wrought. So trying to figure out how to diversify all the resources a social entrepreneur has, yes, investors, but also philanthropic dollars, can mean a world of difference.
Thank you for that. And I'd like to come back to that for us to better understand how, as entrepreneurs, we can tap better into free money effectively. Viola, I want to hear from you. When we talked earlier, you talked about your story at Uvamba, and I'd really like to kind of delve into your journey building the company and what you have learned about African entrepreneurs that perhaps investors do not see is obvious. And in the previous conversation, there was a comment, I think, that Latanya made about it not being copy and paste when investors are trying to invest in Africa. I'd love to kind of hear some of your story building Uvamba and what you've learned about African entrepreneurs.
Well, my journey starts because as I was part of the diaspora that we don't often feel comfortable talking about, those that turn their backs on the continent because it's so much shinier on the vanilla side of the border, where it's easy to have a job, buy your stuff, get your car, and go about your life and forget about the challenges and problems of the land of our parents. But it's obvious. It became obvious to me when it took an outsider, my business partner, to explain to me that the challenges and problems of the continent of my parents is my legacy for change. And it's a legacy that I ought to commit to if I want to either become rich and wealthy or have impact or basically leave the continent a better place. And if you have an ego the size of mine, that's highly appealing. But it's also highly appealing to investors who always look for that perfect synergy of local addressing it and an addressable market. Now, investors take all of those very empirical calculations and scenarios and say, this is great, this is investable, we can make profit, we can do well, and we can have traction. But they're using these yardsticks based on much more developed economies. What they miss out on is the fact that majority of the CEOs and founders, especially of startups, are not always African, they're from outside. So it's very difficult to share the wealth and develop skill set. There is a tendency for us to grow differently. We don't have legacy systems, so we build things that are really from the heart of creativity. So if an investor comes along and says, in order for me to continue this lovely little checklist that I've got going on, I need to also hedge my bets and manage my risk. And in order to do that, not only am I going to give this the African risk haircut, whereby I expect very high digit returns because of the quote unquote risk, which they really don't understand and they don't ask about. They're also going to measure the success of that startup or business as if they're measuring the ability for a fish to climb a tree. We don't grow the same way because the half and the creativity comes from a totally different place. With an ecosystem that does not make resources readily available because we're not built for meteoric success the way you see in the Western world. Our success genome is very different, is very cultural, has ethnic implications, and is developed in an area that it's so difficult that in actual fact, the value of what we build is way higher than what the Silicon Valley guys will look at and say this is a success. If you get this much growth with so little input, especially for Black female tech developers and innovators, then there is something to be said. If you imagine if the ecosystem, the government, and the digital divide was created a little differently. Now, as a member of the diaspora who went home and built a business, it was very eye-opening to me, but it quickly helped me align with other Africans who are there and have always stayed there, that we need to build our businesses in such a way that they are steeped very deeply in who we really are in order for that, the businesses, the innovations, the technology to have long-term stickiness. When you bring these systems from the outside, they only last for a little while, or they last in such a way that not everybody can be part of that journey. It's so important for me as a member of the diaspora to have an understanding in how to connect the past to the future in order for that legacy to be restitched together. Hafiza, you like sewing, so you know what that's like to take what was and connect it to what will be. And that requires a lot of authenticity.
Right. Yeah, taking that word authenticity. So what have you seen, maybe some anecdotes, authentic African entrepreneurs who make a success and take into account, the context that they're growing in rather than trying to borrow something from someone. They could borrow, but they borrow with a real understanding of context. Any examples or anecdotes you can share?
I'm trying not to come across this shameful self-promotion, but I have seen, especially when I spent a lot of time speaking with startups who are in hubs and incubators, delivery and technology kind of are ships in the night. So trying to find ways in which to host the ability to have e-commerce in a very simplified way, knowing full well that not everybody has a credit card or a mobile wallet, especially in Francophone Africa, to buy goods abroad, but instead trying to aggregate goods and have them delivered to a specific delivery point without the assurance that whoever is running that delivery point is going to be honest enough, and trying to jerry-rig a solution for that, and then have some sort of a verification system for people to pick those goods up so that they can be part of the broader global distribution of goods and services. I've seen that in Cameroon. That was inspirational to us when we looked at how missing the bookends are for the digital journey of both banking and e-commerce, which is why we've called ourselves a trade tech. Being able to borrow from the Airbnb style of apartments and houses for vacations inspired us to adapt that for warehouses. Because if you're wanting to talk about taking investor capital to generate growth for small and medium enterprises, there are some fundamental things that you might not realize. One of them being that if over the last few generations, a family has had a business that has constantly stayed in startup mode because they can't get the right kind of growth capital, it means that they might not have more space for inventory. You solve that solution, that problem, by giving them access to flexible warehouses in the environment, which is exactly what they do with commercialized or commoditized warehousing for coffee, cocoa, and the rest of it. We can scale things down and up with great flexibility across the African continent, and we can take the best of what is out there and adjust it. And that's and we borrowed that idea, of course, from the outside and from looking at what local young e-commerce groups were doing with trying to make sure there was competitive products in the marketplace.
That's great. That's very refreshing to see that ground level kind of innovation. I'd like to kind of talk about entrepreneurs and their understanding of how they can access capital. So we've got different kinds of investors here, and I'd love to have you all chime in to for entrepreneurs in the room, global room, to get a better understanding of if they're raising capital from your organization, what are your objectives and priorities that they need to be aware of so that you can be great partners? Maybe we start with Andile on that.
Thanks, Sid. Yeah, I think I'll probably respond the question in two ways. The first one is, just to say that more generally, I think we need to think about, access to capital in Africa in a different way. Than the traditional VC, PE, MES or bond market. If you think about it, remittances alone, last year were just short of $50 billion. They were just around $48 billion. Now, what one is saying is that unless, we are conscious about, I think if you had, the earlier panel talking about supporting families and villages in the continent. Remittances is almost about family support. It's about education, healthcare, lifestyle of families, of people either in the diaspora or elsewhere. That's the amount of money. I do believe that, a similar, or at least a 50 or a third of that amount can be raised within the continent and by people like us, Sid, 20 or so billion to invest in the continent. If we are able to have 50 billion, close to 50, short of 2 billion to get into 50 billion for remittances, why not raise 10 billion in the continent? In whatever, if you look at those numbers of remittances, they range from, below $1,000, below $100, right up to bigger numbers. So how can we mobilize, African capital? I don't think we will mobilize African capital using the traditional models of private equity and VC, etc. We have to think about something unique. So in South Africa, for instance, there's something called a stokvel. Stokvel is people putting money together, and use it after a year. It's shared. I won't go into a detail, sharing it. But for us as private equity, we are an impact fund. And of course, impact issues are very important to us, issues, but we focus in tech and nothing else. Also we have a certain ticket that we invest in. As you know, private equity, there's EBITDA related issues that we have to take into consideration. But we do invest in sub-Saharan Africa, basically. in internet companies, in technology companies, across the board. But broadly, I think for me, I mean, I think the answer is in us, is how to create an African capital market, you know, because, I mean, learning from remittances, and how do we then have maybe a structure that will make people comfortable to invest in, you know, I mean, a lot of people were used to pension funds, and, you know, pension funds, they then invest, but there should be something that attracts us, that we can invest in, and something that we believe in, and that we can trust those people that they will give us a return on the investment.
That's great. I love that, and I want to come back to that idea of an African investment platform and what that might look like. Hafiza, from your perspective, what should entrepreneurs be aware of as they come to your platform, which, you know, is using U.S. donor money to invest? What are the investors' priorities, and, you know, are they more interested in high return? Are they more interested in getting their money back? Are they interested in impact? And how should entrepreneurs kind of present themselves to such investors?
The social entrepreneurs that we work with work across so many different lines. So yes, they are I'm thinking of Pharmaline that's in Ghana, which is a social software agribusiness that provides direct information in local languages to small scale farmers, so they can get the right resources and information to grow their fields and then access international markets. Now, on one hand, like, yes, it's an agribusiness, but they are also providing like a social benefit. I mean, these are small scale farmers that often operate within their own silos. But once they are plugged into Pharmaline, they're a part of a larger network, and they actually have a liaison to big international companies that they have the wherewithal in their local languages to negotiate prices that best fit their needs. So with that kind of example, Pharmaline, along with a lot of other social entrepreneurs, recognize that since my work is across many different lines, let me figure out all the different ways of increasing capital for my organization, including philanthropic dollars kind of thing. And then let me be flexible in how I approach different institutions and investors in crafting that message, and allow them to see this vision, and they can then go back and kind of make a case, but get them excited. So where King Bee comes in is, yes, we are the intermediary, but what I'm seeing with social entrepreneurs is that their flexibility allows a lot of different other hands coming into play. And I don't know if you're familiar with like the board culture in the US, but in the US, to serve on a board is like, it increases one's social capital and like elite positioning kind of thing. You can't go to the Met without putting in $100,000 kind of thing to join the board, because then you as a board member get access to all these other people at elite companies and institutions. So with that, in a sense, social entrepreneurs are recognizing, if I have a really good relationship with the philanthropic world, the board members are actually the CEOs, the presidents, the executives of these companies. And so that's another avenue that I can get into my work. So all that to say, social entrepreneurs that are most savvy in this space are recognizing, like, yes, there's an investor class, but also thinking investment in many different ways. 0% interest, of course, returns, all that kind of thing. But really with the philanthropic space, you can grow your own networks, your own relationships, and get free money.
Yes, free money. Let's talk about that. And can I just remind everybody to be on mute? Thank you. So maybe explain a little bit more about how your foundation works in terms of how does the money flow? Who invests and why do they invest, and where does the money go to?
So King Baudouin Foundation US is an intermediary grant maker, meaning we're donor driven in that a donor, which is say like a philanthropic foundation, will let us know we want to give to Kitabu in Kenya, which is a for-profit software for curriculum. But since they're for-profit and we are not able to give directly to them for whatever reason, that may be strictures due to their own internal constitution, a legal advice, whatever, then they come to King B, approach us and ask if we can facilitate that donation to, in example, Kitabu. So that's what we do. There's other instances where a for-profit will come to us and say, hey, we have investors that are interested in giving to us, and they're actually interested in giving to us via donations, via a grant. Are you able to facilitate what they would like to give to us as a grant to us without us having to set up as a registered charity in the US, because my work is in Mali and I want nothing to do with dealing with compliance of charitable organizations in the US. So we get it from both sides, where a donor wants to approach us to give a tax-deductible donation to the project they see fit, and then the actual for-profit coming to us and saying, hey, I have these donors that want to give to us. How can they do it?
Great. And what kind of entrepreneur is this most suited for?
Well, typically, most social entrepreneurs, even though we work in Europe and Africa, they're predominantly in Africa, which I think speaks to like the creativity in this space. The social entrepreneurs, I'd say they're young, typically under 40, and they've been in existence for less than 7 years.
Right.
So and most likely they got started of like, oh, I have this great idea of like how I'm going to help the world. And then once they got to like year 2, they're like, wait, I have to figure out how to make this sustainable, learning from my forefathers that doesn't rely upon an office in London or New York to make sure my project gets going. So I'm going to figure out how to make sure that this is sustainable, get it for profit so we can keep this going. And then we come in a couple of years later.
Wonderful. Yeah, and this is particularly relevant for the simple fact that friends and family money, which typically entrepreneurs in other parts of the world have access to when starting companies, is not as available on our continent. Remittances help, but there are organizations like KBUS that provide free money for entrepreneurs to be able to get their company to a place where other investors can come in. So it reduces the risk for everybody. So we should be looking out for your organization and others like yours for this entrepreneurial journey. Viola, I'd like to move on to you because I think you kind of address like the next part of the ecosystem. Describe a little bit more the kind of financial solutions that you've come up with for entrepreneurs and how they help the entrepreneurs move their business on.
I'd like to swap out what you're saying and take out the word entrepreneurs and take it and put in the word businesses, even though the reality on the continent is that individual human beings are running all kinds of businesses themselves.
Yeah.
But the reason I say this is because the missing middle has individuals operating as companies, whether they are legally registered or not. And that's the group that we deal with. You are making a really good reference, and so is Andile, about the different types of capital that needs to be on the continent in order to diversify that choice so that capital is made available in a way that is relevant to whoever the recipient is. That's something that is very deeply ingrained in what we do. So for us, we found out the hard way that unsecured capital in the hands of individuals who are not legally registered and may be difficult to find is a very quick way to lose all the money that you ever had. And partnering with, let's say, microfinance institutions who have leadership who have come also from the informal space but have just applied for a bank license is also not particularly good for the ecosystem. Those two events and looking at what does it take to help African businesses grow led us to realize that in order to secure capital, getting them the inventory that they need to sell is the first directive. So we raise capital from institutional investors, high net worth individuals, and anybody else that understands and wants to be part of that journey. And we buy the goods that the customers want or need. We've built AI to understand risk around specific products, suppliers, region, seasonality, culture, ethnicity, all the way through to the end of the workflow in case that transaction were to fail. And we import the goods, distribute, provide warehousing on demand, and allow customers to buy goods back. No goods are given without capital first. Such a simple idea that mystifies people. If we did it the other way around, it would be lending. We don't want to be a bank. So for us, it was trying to thread the needle very carefully to avoid being a bank while also driving inclusion in a way that banks cannot, and other people say they'd like to, but have never figured out how to do that on a consistent basis using a digital platform. And that's why we are trade, because it's buying and selling. That's why from a social impact standpoint, if customers fail to complete a transaction, they don't go into poverty with us, they don't go into debt with us. We help the ecosystem maintain its tenuous levels. We instead just sell them to somebody else. That customer can come back. But it isn't enough to make that money available that way. We have to find ways to insert some sort of business and performance improvement. So when our customers come to us, we're also flooding them with tools in order to become better.
That's so refreshing to hear. I don't have the data, but I know intuitively that most African businessmen and women are involved in trade, and that's primarily what they do. And it's probably the rarest form of capital. It's very, very hard to find trade finance, especially for smaller businesses.
You said it correctly. Finding the data about this, which is something that we've begun to pull, especially with the natural language chatbot that we created, is one of the ways in which to find information that needs to be turned into data, because it's not sitting there in tidy bite-sized noughts and crosses, ones and zeros. You really have to take situations and make sense of them and test them in order to find out what the outer areas of the parameters of that reality are. And that's what we've done. And that's why it's easier now to talk to investors about this, because most people only think in terms of traditional finance, lending, and credit. That does not always work for most of our continent. And I think in the previous conversation that you and I had, it was in going through this logic process that we accidentally became Sharia compliant, not knowing what Islamic finance was from a can of paint. We've since become certified.
That's fantastic. That is so fantastic. I'd like to spend the last few minutes of our conversation here talking about an idea that Andile introduced about what would it look like if we could raise finance from the continent with the belief that that finance is there. Again, we may not have the data because that data has not been collected, but intuitively we know that the capital is there. What would it look like if we were able to mobilize this capital that is sitting in the continent to help entrepreneurs? And maybe, Andile, you can lead us into this part of the conversation.
Thanks. Thanks. I think I mean, if you take, you know, what James talked about earlier, you know, the Africa Free Trade, you know, agreement. I mean, that is a huge milestone for the continent. It's one of, you know, I think. You know, I think it was signed last year. I mean, I know the people who are busy putting up together the first Secretary General. It will be located in in Ghana. But the truth is that for trade to happen, for cross-border trade, you need cross-border finance. You need, settlement that's going to accompany that. I mean, because when you talk about a free trade zone, it has to be accompanied by, movement of capital in a much more freer way, in a way that is going to be seamless, So that is one issue that I hope will not hinder the free trade, zone as the largest free trade zone, that, the financial instruments, and that there must be a regime that is financial that's going to accompany that for that to succeed, okay? The second issue is the following. I think entrepreneurs in the continent, should first sponsor an argument to the African Union of a much more, because remember, financial instruments, you need a good regulatory environment to make that instrument work. Otherwise, without it, you are going to find it very difficult to operate, And I mean, that's why, pension funds are regulated in a particular way, private equity, listed companies, you name it. There's a regulatory regime that governs the way in which capital markets. I think, one of the things that, again, made me, I don't know, made me a bit sad, we might have all seen the startups in the African continent as to who is the owner of some of these startups. There are just recent reports I saw, UK Guardian about the startups in the African continent as to who the owners of some of these startups are, which therefore, for instance, the reason why other people are able to bring capital and buy intellectual property of Africa in these startups is because they are coming out of favorable structures of raising capital. So unless we sit and talk to each other about lobbying politicians and define this capital market structure of an African who is willing to invest and what type of benefits that would generate in the continent, that is the only way we can be able to, do this. Otherwise, if we do it in the current environment, I'm telling you, it's just going to be very difficult. The people who benefit are those people who bring euro and dollar into the continent, basically. If you have capital in local currency, you want to invest elsewhere, you have to take that money back to dollar and back into that local currency. It's quite a mission. I therefore believe, Sid, that we need to have continuous conversation about, the capital markets in Africa and what type of a structure could be approved in the same way as, this free trade agreement was agreed upon. Unless that is done, we will find ourselves, in a difficulty, trying to define private equity or VC. Other markets don't even have, laws of venture capital, A venture capital is just, you are running startup, but there's no venture capital laws that encourage seed funding, Series A, B, that are those incentives, for instance, from a tax point of view, there are benefits. There's no sophistication in terms of, these alternative funding models. So therefore, we need a lobby structure to change the regulatory regime in Africa to allow African capital to invest. That's the first step, basically.
That's an important point, and especially again the copy paste approach will not work. We need to define this from the ground up. You know, what do we need, and therefore we build what we need on the continent, as opposed to, you know, taking other models that have worked elsewhere. We can learn from them, but we need to build it from the ground up. Viola, I know you're working on trade and trade finance. Are you seeing this going cross-border yet, or is this pretty confined within certain country?
Let me give you an example of what I've seen in our own portfolio. Because of the alternative nature and the way we've cobbled our solution together, and this is where Angela's point is so pertinent, we sit in a strange gray area that is not obvious to an investor, definitely not banking, and it's not traditional trade. It's really about trying to have control of assets and inventory in order to make growth. So we have a woman in particular, when she started with us, she was really just doing painting and decorating supplies in the local Douala area. And she wanted to branch into another asset class. So she wanted to play with the big boys, quote unquote, and do construction glass. And when she came to it, she had been doing a little bit of this, but she was only doing 1 or 2 containers every 5 or 6 months. And with our type of growth formulation, she got to the point where she was doing 32 containers every 3 months and distributing widely. It clicked in her head that she wanted to open in Gabon and Nigeria, which really pushed us to see that if we can get enough momentum, growth, and increase the velocity of that capital moving amongst our customers, because now we've got retailers coming to us for funding because they're being brought by the wholesalers that we're selling to, then we can easily justify moving into other markets. But of course, COVID-19 has happened. There is the wherewithal to become cross-border, but it doesn't look the way the classical cross-border trading looks like. It's trying to find other people either to sell to, or individuals wanting to go and open another branch of themselves in some small way. Now, the beauty of this is that it's actually not that difficult, because if you remember, the zones of Africa, like OHADA, CIMAC, SADC, or whatever the case may be, allows a very easy ability to do this, especially when you're sharing a currency, in our case, the CFA. You're sharing business law, you're sharing legal law, you're sharing contractual frameworks. So there should be no reason that businesses shouldn't be looking at themselves as already positioned for cross-border realities. But just as Andile said, there are certain things that need to be in place to happen. Otherwise, it's just going to be these individual spotty solutions and spotty examples without that beautiful aggregated growth pattern that we want to see that make investors happy.
Wonderful. Yeah, so I think the message is there's need for a top-down structure that helps everything work, and then there's already opportunities to do on-the-ground solutions, business to business, and these things need to happen together. I know it's a much bigger conversation, but I'm glad we're having this conversation, especially after the Africa Free Trade Agreement has been signed, because it provides hope that we can unlock a lot of business and investment across the continent. I'd like to leave some time for some questions from the audience. If you do have a question, I'd suggest putting it in the chat. I have a few here that have been sent through. If you put it in the chat, we'll pick it up, and hopefully we can address it in the next few minutes that we've got. And while we're doing that, one question that came through was about de-risking toolkits. So for entrepreneurs, have you seen any de-risking toolkits that can educate entrepreneurs about how to de-risk their business. And Viola, you can take that.
Sure. We were sitting after a few flammable fluids at the beach one day, and it occurred to us that there is a Japanese mindset and management style that has been popular in the past. There's the American style, but what's the African style? And so we started sitting and thinking, how can we create something that is specific to us? And we came up with a product called Pamoja, which is Swahili for together, if I'm not mistaken. And in that toolkit, which is digitally available, that we're in the process of rolling out, were the basics of customer relationship management. Could people please, Fiona? Thank you. It's got a customer relationship management product, a point of sales, it's got some HR, and it's got very specific types of features to understand where your money's coming in, where it's going out, and what is really profit, and it is on a mobile app. And we're trying to make it in such a way that it is voice activated. So de-risking the continent is about helping each business to have a self-awareness, so that they realize that there is a journey that takes them from here to there to there, and these are the tools to do it, and this is what it looks like when your business is running well, and this is what it looks like when it's not. We take cues from the environment, the same in business, but trying to give an African identity to basic business excellence that can be replicated regardless of what country that we're in is one way of de-risking the whole environment, especially if you're making transactions like us that have such a low default rate, but such a good profit margin in it. That's what we see as a good way of de-risking, especially when it doesn't let go of having women involved or any of those other individuals who have barriers to entry.
Thank you. And I would add to that, definitely look for foundation money and learn how to access that money. Right?
I've already reached out to you on LinkedIn.
I just want to make a plug to Echoing Green. Many of you may already know it, but if you know of someone that's like, I have an idea, Echoing Green is a US-based philanthropic organization that provides 2-year fellowships. So I think it's $50,000 a year as a salary to the entrepreneur. It includes healthcare, and it really is like the early stages from idea to like that first 2 years. So I have personal friends that have benefited from it. Some of the organizations I mentioned today have been a part of it. So there is a way of using philanthropic money at the very beginning just to get your idea off the ground. So when you are able to go to investors, you can answer many of the questions like, well, what's your track record and who else believes in it and all that kind of stuff that I don't really know about the business world about. But yes, just a plug for Echoing Green.
Good to know.
Thank you, and that's super, super valuable. We're coming to the end, and I'd just like to kind of give each of the panelists an opportunity to say something to the diaspora community. You know, what's your word of inspiration or insight going forward for the diaspora community? Maybe start with you, Hafiza.
I am a Black American. My family traces us back to Texas and Tennessee. So to step into this space working with Diasporans and of course people on the continent has been, I mean, actually really life-changing, because just to see this lineage of many different types of businesses and how people, different perspectives, has been mind-blowing to me as someone, as a Black American that has a pretty limited understanding of what we all can be and what we all were and what we all are. So with that, my parting words are, I'm so excited to join you all in this journey. If you have any questions for me, or if I can provide any help in any way, please reach out to me via LinkedIn or get in touch with Almaz and connect with me directly.
Thank you, Hafiza. And Viola, what would be your parting words?
For the last 2 years, we've been running a hashtag that says, "This ain't your granddaddy's Africa." And it really does evoke a lot of emotional response, but it is true. Nothing is what it was before. We have a new opportunity, especially from the digital standpoint, to create the best of ourselves and to become globally relevant and to be at the table or build our own table. And if anybody wants to get in touch with me, you can reach me on LinkedIn or via my email, viola.llewellyn@ovamba.com. And we welcome engagement in so many different ways. It's time to birth who we're supposed to be. Forget about what happened in the past, but the most beautiful thing that we can do is to take advantage of that horrific triangle that once occurred between Africa, African Americans, and Caribbeans. As a group, we are a powerful economic force. We have a digital platform upon which to share products, services, and ideas and have partnerships. There isn't anything stopping us. I think if anything, now's the time. So thank you for having me on the call.
That's powerful. Thank you, Viola. And Andile would leave you to leave the last parting words to the community.
Okay. Thank you very much. And here's my request is that, I mean, I know the work you are doing, Sid, you know, there is a gap between the entrepreneurs and the startup community and their path, their growth path, and financial or finance regulations in countries. And what this is creating is that it makes it difficult for local investors to invest in these startups, whether in Cameroon or Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, you know, South Africa, wherever. But it makes it easy for somebody coming from outside to invest, and which in essence is creating a very difficult, I would say, ecosystem. One of the things through fora such as this is that let's create a conversation about the regulatory environment in Africa, the finance regulatory environment for startups and entrepreneurs to grow. It's an area that is a blind spot that no one is looking at. I mean, there's an assumption that the regulatory environment is okay for people to grow. It's not. No. It is not. And unless we create a conducive environment, otherwise the entire ecosystem of incubators, accelerators, entrepreneurs is going to reach a ceiling. Why? And then we'll keep asking ourselves, why these startups do not reach a level of, you know, unicorns or listable companies? Because the regulatory environment in countries where these startups are does not create, you know, does not facilitate that. And it's a conversation that is not being held anyway. And therefore, Sid, I'm saying, you know, let's start this conversation everywhere in various sub-regions of the continent and try and make sure that the ministers of finance or the regulators, or I mean, of capital markets, they understand, you know, the startup ecosystem and what type of regulations need to be created for that sector to succeed. That is my last parting shot. Thank you.
Thank you, Andile. And I'll put my hand up to be part of that conversation. Very, very important conversation. Well, thank you so much, Andile. Thank you, Viola. Thank you, Hafiza. This has been a great conversation. I think there's lots more to talk about, and there's lots more conversation that's been happening in the chat that I hope that the team will capture and share with the group. And thank you all for participating. This has been great, and I'll hand over back to Almaz to close off the session today. You're on mute, Almaz.
Oh, okay, I got it. Sorry, I was trying to be good. I was just saying that I want you to join me in thanking these incredible speakers. I'm just gonna start with our morning speakers, Peter, James, and oh my goodness, what am I missing? Latanya, and then Sid and Viola and Hafiza and Andile. Thank you so much for participating. You're bringing up what we are for, what we exist about, the role of the diaspora. We've been doing this for 10 years, and every day I learn new things. And one thing, though, I'm taking away from this entire conversation is the awesome responsibility that the diaspora has to make a contribution to the continent and the community where we live. We really do have that, and I absolutely believe in the diaspora. There is no other investor in that continent as we are. We are, as I said at the beginning, we are extremely generous, but let's also be smart in the way we are generous. And I think someone was sharing what would it look like if we can shift the remittances to go back to the continent differently. Yes, there are different ways to do it. I will still support any family member who asks for anything as much as I can, as much as everybody can, but still we got to really use our money to invest in the continent and invest it smartly. We do have partners. Why is ADN always saying Africans and Friends of Africa? I'm gonna say this is really internal to me. The continent and each one of us as ambassadors of the continent, we are absolutely where we are because there are also other people who may not be born in the US, but they really love what in Africa, but they really love the continent and they are a part of it. So am I here in Silicon Valley? This is my community. I contribute to it as much as it contributes to me and to the global community, the same as I do to the continent. So it's not a zero-sum game, it's both. We just have to really do this in a way that is conducive, that's helpful to everyone that we touch every single day, especially in this time of COVID. I ask myself and all of us to become kinder, generous if possible, and still be understanding and flexible because there are so many people suffering of mental health. I'm gonna bring that up because there are now 1 in 4, I'm understanding, our people are challenged with this depressive situation that we're in. Not everyone can actually get up in the morning and do what we're doing. I remain grateful for that, and I continue to be aware and do the very best I can to be present. And before I let you go, I want you to also help me thank my team. The ADN has incredible, awesome, small team, and I want to just mention them. I'm going to start with Deborah, who has been with me for a very long time. Dan Hartz, who runs our finance, has been there from the beginning of ADN. Caroline Ocampo, who's managing our media relations. And then we have a new person who just joined us, and Megan, wherever you are, amazing young woman who's just joined to help with ADIS, and she'll be with us for the foreseeable future, and I'm very grateful to each one of them. Yinka, you may not see her, but look at the website that she has developed. She pretty much manages our IT, and I can't do any of this stuff, so I'm very grateful to everyone. We've learned some things today that we will do better in the August 26th session. That is going to be on healthcare. We have some really phenomenal people that we're putting together. Some are coming from Africa, some are here in the United States. We will be sending out a couple of things. One is we're gonna send out the minutes and the video recording of the session. I ask you to share it as much as possible. If networks have to grow, it grows simply because we believe in it and we are sharing it. if we keep knowledge that's not shared to me is not knowledge. I ask you to do what everyone has been doing today through the chats. The kind of connection that I saw was phenomenal, but I still ask you to go join the African Diaspora Network online platform. For now, we're not charging you, but believe me, you'll be getting invoice someday soon. We've been giving this for free because we believe in what we're doing, and we also have the knowledge that at some point people will actually support this organization, and you're a part of it. We're very grateful for that opportunity, and I want to say to all of you, thank you. Thank you to our board for being so supportive, the Executive Leadership Council, and really, really thank you to our sponsors. Have a wonderful day, wonderful afternoon, and thank you for honoring us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm happy to have you wherever you're from. I'm just beautiful. Thank you, everyone. Oh, sister, so good to see you. So good to see you. It's good to have you. I wish we were in person. We'll be giving hugs, but yeah, it's a big hug.
Hi, Almaz.
Hi, Diane. So good to have you. Thank you for supporting us.
Oh, I hope everybody does. I know everybody does. Yeah.
Yes, they
Great.
will. Thank you so much.
Great.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care. Bye-bye.